Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk paid an unexpected visit to Lviv on Tuesday, meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Both leaders discussed further help for Ukraine ahead of tomorrow's EU Summit in Brussels. More on this in a moment, but first, let's take a look at the latest headlines. Top Russian General Igor Kirillov has been killed in a bomb blast in Moscow. The EU will investigate foreign TikTok interference during the elections in Romania. And Western countries agree to disrupt and deter Russia's shadow fleet. Poland's Prime Minister made an unannounced visit to Ukraine on Tuesday. Donald Tusk met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Lviv to discuss support for Ukraine ahead of the possible ceasefire talks. Paweł Trzaskowski has more.
The visit of the Polish Prime Minister to Lviv in Ukraine was long shrouded in secrecy, and its main purpose, rallying up Western support for a just peace in Kiev.
Stop speculating in any capital of the world about Ukraine's possible defeat. This has nothing to do with facts.
Donald Tusk underscored that it is important that Ukraine be as strong as possible at the negotiating table. He reiterated Poland's support for Ukraine's NATO accession.
If it was up to Poland, it wouldn't take more than one day.
And said that the incoming Polish presidency in the EU Council means intensifying EU accession talks for Kiev. These words of support from the Polish Prime Minister come just before Volodymyr Zelenskyy's visit to Brussels. There, the Ukrainian president intends to seek support from the EU ahead of the expected ceasefire talks. The talks in which Russia, Zelenskyy says, cannot be trusted.
But there's no escape from it. We live next to them and we share a long border. That is why Ukraine needs to emerge from this war as a very strong country.
Earlier this week, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, said that no schemes involving a freeze of the conflict will suit Russia. On Wednesday, Zelenskyy will visit Brussels to meet with EU and NATO leaders. The meeting comes as Europe awaits Donald Trump's return to the White House in January and a possible shift in US policy toward the conflict in Ukraine.
The general in charge of Russia's nuclear, biological and chemical defense forces and his assistant were assassinated in a bomb attack in Moscow on Tuesday morning. Ukrainian intelligence has claimed credit for the attack just 24 hours after the general was charged in absentia by the Ukrainian Security Service for the mass use of banned chemical weapons in Ukraine. And so we now go live to our Ukraine correspondent, Oz Katerzi in Kiev. Good evening, Oz. What more details do we have on the assassination?
Well, we understand that Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov was assassinated as he was leaving a building in the early hours of Tuesday morning. And we've, the video footage that we've been able to obtain there showing the moment of explosion. Now, it's believed this explosive device was held in a scooter, and the SBU, Ukraine's security services, have claimed responsibility for this attack. So very publicly saying they claim after it. Now, this came after them, 24 hours after them finding this Lieutenant General responsible for the use of chemical weapons inside Ukraine at least 4,800 times. So this is quite a serious level of offence that the SBU has charged this Lieutenant General with. And as a result of which they say that they're completely justified in taking actions such as these, which was including the assassination of him and his general in the early hours of the morning. Now, so this is about as much as we know now. The other details are coming through. Sorry, it's very windy out here. The other details are coming through from Russian state media, through the Russian security services. So those are both sides confirming the story that this Russian Lieutenant General was assassinated in an attack ordered and carried out by the Ukrainian security services.
That was Oscar Teji reporting from Kiev. Thank you very much, Oz, and of course, stay safe. And we're staying on the topic. No Russian military officials should feel safe. Analysts say the high-profile assassination of Russian Lieutenant General Kirillov demonstrates Kiev's ability to kill key military figures at the very heart of the Kremlin's war machine. The timing and style of the attack may have been chosen to send a clear message to Moscow's elite ahead of possible talks when Donald Trump returns to the White House in January. John Todd has this report.
This video claims to show the moment a daring intelligence operation takes out one of Ukraine's highest-profile targets, using a bomb hidden in an electric scooter. Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov led Russia's nuclear, biological and chemical forces. Ukraine's SBU intelligence service accused him of using chemical weapons against Kyiv's forces. His killing will unnerve Russia's military and political elite.
If that will be confirmed that it was a Ukrainian, that Ukrainian did that, it means that any official cannot feel secure in the situation, even if they are in Russia territory.
Moscow has launched an investigation into the blast, which also claimed Kirillov's aid. The US, Britain and Canada sanctioned Kirillov for using riot control agents and multiple reports of the toxic choking agent chloropicrin being used on the battlefield. Analysts say the assassination was likely carried out with local support sympathetic to Kyiv's cause.
It shouldn't be surprising that Ukrainian intelligence is able to find people who are willing to fight for Ukraine and to risk their lives in what is Ukraine's existential struggle for survival.
Neighbors say Kirillov had no security.
At the moment you see a lot of police, but usually everything is open. Anybody can go in and out, drive in and out.
Kirillov is the latest in a series of targeted assassinations. In November, a senior Russian naval officer, Valery Trankovsky, was killed in a car bomb. Ukraine said he had ordered missile strikes on civilian targets. Pro-war blogger Vladlen Tarsky was killed in a cafe bombing in St. Petersburg in March last year. And in August 2022, Daria Dugina, the daughter of far-right Russian political philosopher Alexander Dugin. Experts say the attack is embarrassing for President Putin.
This is damaging Russia's reputation. They cannot be sure and they cannot 100% protect their very high flag officers. Yes, they can be killed even in Moscow. So this is very worrying, and of course, it's a kind of very worrying message to other important people in Moscow.
The former Russian president, Dmitry Medvedev, who now serves as deputy chairman of the country's Security Council, vowed imminent revenge for Kirillov's assassination.
As the new EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas faces challenges ranging from political turmoil in Georgia to Donald Trump's return to the White House. She joined our European Affairs correspondent, Sasha Farbach, for an exclusive interview to discuss navigating these turbulent times and her vision for Europe's role on the global stage.
Now, there's a whole host of issues concerning the EU, a tectonic shift from Syria to Georgia and what to do with Russia. Now, the woman tasked with leading the initiative of what to do next for the European Union is Kaja Kallas, the new High Rep and Executive Vice President and former Prime Minister of Estonia. She joins us now. Thank you, Prime Minister, and now High Rep Commissioner for joining us. So let's start with, first of all, Georgia. I mean, we've seen now weeks of protests. We've seen now a resolution passed in this parliament criticizing the government there. Sanctions seem to be blocked by Hungary and Slovakia. What kind of signal can the EU send to the people of Georgia? Are we entangled? Can there still be movement for that country to join the EU?
Well, first of all, we redirected the funds that were meant to the government, to the civil society, to actually be with the Georgian people, to help the Georgian people and the civil society in this regard. So that is what we have done. We have also decided yesterday to do the visa-free regime ban for the diplomatic and service passports. And of course, we are talking and discussing the sanctions also to those who are really using violence against protesters.
But at the same time, it does seem to be like Georgia needs a signal. It seems there's a bit of disunity on our end. They were so close moving ever forward. But how do we overcome countries potentially like Hungary and Slovakia in blocking that? Because we need their approval to do anything meaningful.
Well, we have tools that we explored yesterday also at the Foreign Affairs Council to overcome. I mean, there is a possibility of abstention rather than veto. There's a difference. Okay, you don't want to be part of it, but don't be against this is also, a signal. But we are not there yet, so we need to work. We have 27 countries, 27 different democracies. It will continue to be so.
And also, if we're looking a bit further, looking at what might be ahead, looking at a very different council presidency. Hungary is about to finish. Poland will start soon. What are kind of expectations of the Polish presidency taking the helm in January?
We have high expectations for Polish presidency. I have already talked with the foreign minister Sikorski as well, what we can do together in terms of developing Europe further and also to doing things for our own defense. So I'm looking forward to the cooperation.
Okay. Great, thank you very much. And thank you for watching. Sasha Farber for TVP World, talking with the High Rep, Europe's chief diplomat here in Strasbourg.
The 19th day of peaceful protests against the government's anti-European actions is underway in Georgia. Tomorrow, President Salome Zourabichvili will speak at the European Parliament to address the current situation in her country. Our correspondent, Donald, will tell you more about the actions of Western leaders and the latest from Tbilisi.
Another night of protests here in the capital of Georgia continue. This time, historians taking to the streets and marching throughout Tbilisi and gathering here in front of the parliament building. Now, the president of Georgia, President Zourabichvili, her term ended yesterday. She is now headed to Strasbourg, where she will address the European Parliament tomorrow. So what's on the agenda? Well, sanctions. Only two countries in the European Union, that's Estonia and Lithuania, have so far introduced sanctions on members of the Georgian Dream Party, key players. Now, the European Union is going to make an attempt to do the same thing and place sanctions on diplomatic passport holders of the Georgian government in order to put pressure on them. And of course, they want to consult with the president of Georgia to find out exactly what other mechanisms can be used in order to pressure the government and hold those accountable who've been cracking down violently on these protesters here in Georgia. Now, also, another threat, although there are not water cannons and riot police out on the streets here in Tbilisi, and the protests have died down quite a bit, one continuous threat that remains is titushki. These are hired thugs that are usually masked and dressed in black. They've been targeting individual activists and protesters, and of course, basically beating them up. So there are still reports of this happening in several locations throughout the city. And of course, this seems to be a brutal method to make it less attractive for the protesters to show up here in front of the parliament building. Reporting from Tbilisi, Don Arleth, TVP World.
The European Commission has formally opened an investigation into TikTok over whether the Chinese and social media platform broke online laws regarding election integrity. It comes after Romanian intelligence revealed Russia's attempts to meddle in the country's presidential elections last month. TVP World's EU correspondent Angela Skirgens reports from Brussels.
The European Commission has announced that it has launched a formal investigation into social media platform TikTok after recent events occurring in Romania at the November election. Now, the European Commission said today that they would zoom in on data on the platform related to recommender systems. Now, these are the links that link out of the platform onto other websites. Brussels also said that it would examine the contents the platforms paid for and political content. A European Commission spokesperson said that this was of high interest to Brussels. Here is what else they had to say.
these allegations are serious. And we also have to take into account the declassified documents by the Romanian authorities. And all of this hints to potential foreign interference via TikTok. So this is why we will now thoroughly investigate the platform in the context of the DSA.
The move comes about a month later since the European Commission formally invited TikTok to relinquish about 4 months' worth of data. Now, the start date from this was before that November Romanian election and ends in March, right after the German federal election. Now, it's important to note that TikTok hasn't commented on these new developments today, but representatives have been firm in saying that they have taken down disinformation campaigns and would comply with the recommendations from Brussels. My name is Angela Skujins, reporting from the Belgian capital for TVP World.
Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal has said that his country is willing to continue the transfer of gas through its territory, provided it's not Russian gas. The current transfer agreement expires at the end of the year, and unless alternative arrangements are made, a number of countries could face serious gas supply problems. Krzysztof Panak has this report.
Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal announced his position in a Telegram post on Monday, signaling his openness to alternative transfer arrangements. Ukraine will turn off the tap on the pipeline carrying Russian gas through its territory on January 1st, complicated energy supplies for a number of countries. These include Slovakia and Hungary, with Moldova being indirectly affected as well. Chisinau buys electricity from the breakaway region of Transnistria, which will lose its gas supply as well. These problems can be avoided if arrangements are made for the transfer of non-Russian gas.
What that means is it may very well be Russian origin gas, but there's a couple ways this could happen. One thing, say a Slovak or Hungarian company or some other company could go to the eastern border of Ukraine, the border with Russia, and buy the gas at the border. Therefore, when it's transported across Ukraine, technically it's not Russian gas, it belongs to that company.
Another way to supply gas for Ukraine would be to buy it from third countries and then use Ukrainian pipelines to bring it to Europe.
It's a similar ruse. The Azerbaijanis, basically everybody knows they don't have enough gas to fill that pipeline. So therefore, they'd almost for sure, they would for sure be buying Russian gas, relabeling it as their own and sending it back.
The EU aims to stop all purchases of Russian fossil fuels by 2027. So countries like Slovakia and Hungary will have to make alternative arrangements anyway. If no deal is made before the end of the year, they will be forced to look elsewhere for gas supplies for the next 2 years and pay a premium for it.
Ukraine will receive €12 billion from NATO's northern members next year. Estonian Prime Minister Kristen Michal has announced at a summit in Tallinn. Countries forming the Joint Expeditionary Force also pledged to clamp down on Russian activity on the Baltic Sea. Piotr Miszczuk reports.
I am proud to say that CEF countries will provide Ukraine with over €12 billion in military assistance 2025.
The 3 Baltic states, 5 Nordic countries and the Netherlands, under the leadership of the United Kingdom, have reaffirmed their support for Ukraine's war effort and the country's pathway to NATO membership. Members of the Joint Expeditionary Force also vowed to crack down on the Russian Shadow Fleet, made up of aging and poorly maintained vessels operating with minimal regard toward the regulations and used to skirt sanctions on Russian gas and oil.
The UK, Denmark, Sweden, Finland and Estonia will ask suspected Shadow Fleet vessels for proof of insurance. Their actions will be assessed and addressed in coordination with our international partners.
Michal also announced that the Russian ships will be boarded in certain areas if they do not respond. Though JEF can be deployed in support of NATO, it can also act independently and act faster, says Aleksandra Kuczynska-Zonik.
Even if we think about NATO's bureaucracy, maybe too much bureaucracy, JEF format can be some kind of complementary format to NATO.
According to a Monday statement from the Estonian government, the measures geared at curbing the Russian Shadow Fleet have been adopted by the JEF countries as well as Poland and Germany. Last month, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk also proposed a course of action outside of the JEF framework.
I propose today to create a Baltic Sea policing mission in the Baltic Sea. I am really happy that my colleagues found it interesting, and we will continue our work on some details.
It remains unclear if and when the Baltic policing mission will garner enough support to take effect.
The countries who are essentially, countries in the region, should perform a mission to face up to these challenges. But there are questions concerning, the composition of one group or the other, and then of course there is NATO, which has its own, obviously, defense planning.
After Sweden and Finland joined NATO, many experts have come to call the Baltic a NATO lake, but Russian activity in the region hasn't waned.
Since the beginning of the full-scale war in 2022 against Ukraine, there are at least 150 hybrid attacks that have taken place on the NATO soil, and a large part of them have taken place on, in the Baltic area.
Now, Russia is suspected of involvement in numerous acts of sabotage in the Baltic Sea, the most notable including the rupture of several Baltic communication links and damaging the Baltic Connector natural gas pipeline.
On January 1st, Poland takes over the rotating presidency of the Council of the EU. Bloc security and further help for Ukraine will top the Polish agenda for the next 6 months. After today's meeting with the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Lviv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is traveling to Brussels for the last EU summit this year. Chief political correspondent Aaron Demon talked about it all with Ignacy Niemczycki, State Secretary at the Office of the Polish Prime Minister. Let's listen.
You're watching TVP World, and we're joined now by Ignacy Niemczycki, Secretary of State from the Office of the Polish Prime Minister. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Can I start with Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Donald Tusk meeting in Lviv today? How big a role do you think Poland, Mr. Tusk, will play in bringing peace to Ukraine?
Well, I think, first of all, it has to be said that it's Ukraine that has to take the decision on what conditions it wants to agree for any kind of a peace deal. And I think the Polish Prime Minister is making that very clear, and is also using his political capital to support Ukraine in this process. Because in the end, we know that any kind of a peace deal with Russia needs to be a permanent one, in that this situation will not happen again in, let's say, 5, 6, 7, 10 years. We don't want any kind of a pause in conflict that would allow Russia to build up its weapons and simply restart. So I think Poland is looking at this in a longer-term perspective. And I think given the presidency in the Council of the European Union, our role is relatively higher than it was in the past.
Let's talk about that long-term vision. I mean, Hungary's proposal for a Christmas ceasefire was rejected by Ukraine and President Zelenskyy. Does Poland oppose any deal that involves concession of land, that effectively freezes the conflict as it stands today?
Well, again, the answer is quite simple. It's up to Ukraine. It's really not.
Do you get a sense that that's the perspective of Ukraine?
Well, I cannot, and will not. Sorry for that, but will not respond to that question because I really feel it's the Ukrainians themselves that have to answer that question. We have to make sure that Poland is safe. We have to make sure that Europe is safe, and for that to happen, we need to focus on making Ukrainians as strong as possible in those talks.
President Zelenskyy is heading to Brussels tomorrow to meet with NATO and EU leaders. In practice, to support Ukraine as much as possible, is it about bringing Ukraine as much as possible into that NATO-EU fold without officially adding them to the membership?
So I would say the meeting between the leaders and President Zelenskyy tomorrow is also to assess the situation. And I know the expectation in capitals of EU member states is that we want to hear firsthand what is the situation on the front, how did the talks with President-elect Trump go, what are the options that Ukraine is considering. So all the questions that you actually asked me before, I think the leaders want to have this discussion with President Zelenskyy. But it's also sending a very strong signal that it's not the first time that Zelenskyy is present during European Council meetings, and that the EU ready is still there supporting Ukraine in its efforts against Russia.
Do you feel like membership of the likes of NATO, EU, is a viable prospect for Ukraine in the current context?
I think the political signal has been sent on EU membership. That's quite clear. And I think right now we have to focus on the technical process. We want this, and Poland wants it to be a merit-based, so-called merit-based approach. It will take some time. But the signal was very strong. At some point in time, Ukraine will join the EU. So on that, I'm certain that at one point Ukraine will join the EU. On NATO, I think it's a very different question, and I think right now we should focus mostly on EU membership, because there's actually a technical progress that is possible, whereas on NATO this would be difficult with the position of some states and NATO states.
What more can European countries be doing to strengthen Ukraine's position, not just on the battlefield, but also in positioning themselves in peace talks?
So I think Ukraine needs to be in a situation where it's sure of the support that it will get. So let's assume that the policy of the new US administration changes. So Ukraine needs to be sure that they will still get the funding, that they will still get the ammunition, that they will still get all the support that they did in the past. And this will make the position, the leverage during the talks stronger. And that's the role of the EU. That's how I see it.
Is that peacekeeping mission for Ukraine still on the table? That idea that some troops could go into Ukraine after peace is negotiated? Countries bordering Russia and Ukraine, like Poland, have been a bit cool on the idea.
Well, first, let's see what the talks will bring. And when we have Ukrainians ready to talk, ready to negotiate, ready to send the signal that they want something, then we'll see what the decisions will be. But also, just to make it clear, for now, the Prime Minister Tusk has made it very clear after his meeting with French President Macron. We're not at this point considering sending any kind of military physical presence to Ukraine.
He did say in that same meeting, that same press conference, that it was for now. So it is still an idea on the table, but right now it's not happening.
Well, at this point, we're not really discussing it. At this point, we're really focusing on the situation here and now. And even the peace talks are something in the future. We're not having them right now directly. So really, let's focus on here and now, and we'll get to those questions later on.
Also on the agenda in Brussels tomorrow is the Western Balkans Summit. Now in October, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, he visited Belgrade, told President Vučić, quote, during the Polish presidency, EU enlargement and the closest possible cooperation with Serbia will be my priority. Do you believe it's possible for Poland and the EU to convince Serbia to turn away from Russia?
Well, I think Serbia has been sending some positive signals, and I think we need to listen carefully to those signals. And I think given what Russia is doing, the EU needs to be flexible in its approach. Otherwise, we'll simply lose, so to speak, some of the potential candidate countries. And then enlargement is also about the security, because enlarging the EU ensures that we have this area of peace, of prosperity, of economic cooperation. So very much so, I can only reinforce what the Prime Minister said. Enlargement is very high on the agenda of the Polish presidency, and we want to deliver.
Now, speaking of Russia, we've seen influence in elections in Romania, Moldova, Georgia. Now we've heard about last year's election in Poland as well. The slogan for the EU presidency is Security Europe. On how many fronts are we fighting security challenges?
So we understand security in a very broad sense, and this is also very much about the democratic resilience. And the resilience of the society includes so-called information security. So it's no secret that Russia has been trying to influence the results of the elections in Europe. In some cases, it's been quite successful, and we need to put a stop to that. That's quite clear. So right now we want to use the presidency to have those discussions with other member states, how we can react to that. There are a number of possibilities. We need to work with social media platforms to limit the spread of disinformation, but we also want to invest more in education, in media literacy, and working with civil society organizations. All of that will create a more resilient society, a more, in a way, secure Europe.
And just lastly, Poland is taking over from Hungary. Hungary and Viktor Orban faced much criticism during their term of the rotating presidency. Did Hungary let Europe down?
Well, I think we need to focus on the Polish presidency, and I think one lesson, one particular lesson from the Hungarian presidency, is that if you want to have an effective presidency, you need to be an honest broker. It's not the time to push your own agenda. It's not the time to be egoistic. And I think this is the lesson we have learned, not only from the last presidency, but from a number of presidencies in the past. And in that role, in that situation, I think Poland will be an honest broker, even though it's quite clear on some points we do have a very strong Polish perspective.
Was Hungary an honest broker? No comment. Thank you for your time. Ignacy Niemczycki, Secretary of State from the Office of the Prime Minister. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this exclusive interview here on TVP World. Do stay with us. Goodbye for now.
And that would be all for now. Thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more news and features here on TVP World.